It's joining me right now, the Republican senator from Ohio, Senator Rob Portman. Senator, thank you for coming in. I followed very closely. You have been fighting this closure since it was announced. I mean, you teamed up with your Democratic colleague, Senator Sherrod Brown, to try to come together to find some resolution to stop it. Its closure today means what for your state?
Well, it's a punch in the gut. I mean, for that area, the Mahoning Valley, those workers, that community has worked hard to be productive for General Motors, and now General Motors is turning on them. So our goal is very simple, Kate, which is we need a plant there that is making automobiles, and General Motors ought to put a new product there. I mean, if the Chevy Cruze isn't selling, which I understand, then we ought to be rewarded by all the hard work and all the success they've had at that plant by giving us a new product. And my hope is that will still happen. We're not giving up. They still own the plant. We're still pushing them. They say they're going to make 20 new electric car models in the next 5 years, and the rumor is some of those may be in China. Well, let's be sure that one of those at least is in Lordstown. It's not too much to ask. By the way, last year, Kate, that plant was their best plant in North America in terms of quality, least number of defects. It's a plant that has been award-winning. Again, it's come through for General Motors. This would be the first time in almost 100 years that General Motors was not assembling vehicles in Ohio. Think about that. So, yeah, They have other plants in Ohio. They make transmissions in Ohio. They do some stamping in Ohio. But this would be the first time we don't have an assembly plant in the second biggest auto state in the country. And it doesn't just affect the plant. It affects the suppliers in the region. I think it's about 10% of the payroll of the Youngstown area, the Mahoning Valley area. So this is a big deal.
It's a big deal. It's a punch in the gut, you say. And when you hear the president, and I know that you've heard that comment before when he said that late last year, when the president downplays the impact. And he says the jobs are going to be replaced in Ohio in something like 2 minutes. I venture to guess you don't see it that way.
Well, certainly not for that valley. There's no replacement because there's no employer that pays those kind of wages and has those kind of benefits that's large. So it's impossible to replace that particular plant. I will say that our economy in Ohio is generally good. In other words, our unemployment is relatively low. We're actually seeing wages going up for the first time in about a decade and a half in Ohio. So there's some good news in Ohio, and even in the Youngstown area, there's some interesting new innovations that are, resulting in actual commercial businesses coming out of the incubator there, and there's just some positive things happening. But this is a really tough one for the valley, and we got to get General Motors to look at this differently. Yes, I understand, again, this particular one small car is not selling, the Cruze, but it doesn't mean that they can't put another product in there and give the plant and the workers once again the opportunity to prove themselves, which they will.
I want to ask you about some other business before the Senate. The Senate's going to be voting next week on the president's declaration of a national emergency to get more money for a border wall. I've heard you say in the last couple of days, Senator, that you're looking for an alternative way to deal with this, a third way. What could that alternative be?
Yeah, Kate, I've been consistent from the start in saying that I thought the president's plan on the border was a good one. I do think that it's been mischaracterized by the other side. I also think it's been misdescribed by the administration. The Democrats basically agreed with everything except one part of it, which was the number of barriers that would be put up. And the president wanted to fund the top 10 priorities of the Border Patrol's own plan, the Border Improvement Plan, which has been adopted by Congress, by the way, the appropriators in the last two appropriation cycles. So I think it's a reasonable plan. It's 234 miles, mostly fencing in Texas, as you know, where there's very little fencing. And I think that's needed, and the Border Patrol thinks it's needed. The question is, how does he fund it? And so I want to help actually secure the southern border for all the right reasons, including the influx of drugs that we're seeing in Ohio, particularly now crystal meth coming over that border. But I also want to do it without creating a bad precedent, which is what my concern is about a national emergency being used in this way.
So what is it? What's the option?
Well, the option I've been working on, as you've probably, covered somewhat, is to not pass the resolution to pass the House, but amend that resolution. We're looking at how we can do that. It is amendable, and to send it back to the House with providing for alternative ways to get to that level of funding. The president actually wants to use existing funding that he has authority to use for 3/4 of it. So 3/4 of the barriers are already funded, both through the appropriation we've already done, but also through using some DOD funds and some Treasury Department forfeiture funds. It's that last quarter, Kate, that requires a national emergency. And it has two problems. One is the courts are likely to look at the use of national emergency in this case, but also the source of the funds from military construction is likely to be tied up in the courts. So for those of us who do care a lot about the southern border, We should actually want to have a more secure way to secure that funding and not rely on this, because that last 25% is certainly going to get tied up in the courts.
Right. So assuming a third way, an amendment doesn't happen, and you do need to vote on this resolution, how are you going to vote?
Well, I have strong concerns about the national emergency part of it. I don't have concerns about the border security plan. I think it's the right plan. So I'm going to be trying hard to figure out a way to get that last 25% through additional means. And by the way, there's one that's very obvious that Congress could easily authorize.
But
there's
to
any
that point
question
is
about
important,
it, which
because
is
you share the concerns. You share the concerns that I've heard a lot of Republicans say, which is it's about the precedent. It's about the way the president's trying to go about this, what he's trying to do with it, not the fact that he wants more money for it. With that in mind, is it a bridge too far with presidential powers? Are you a no if this has to go to a straight vote?
Well, it is about the powers between the executive branch and the congressional branch. And look, I've been on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. I used to work for Bush, as you know, both President Bushes, in fact. And so, yeah, I get that sometimes the executive branch says Congress has too much say and vice versa, but the founders made it very clear it's Congress that appropriates every penny. So I do think that's an issue here that has to be addressed. And so I don't like the use of national emergency for this purpose, because there are other ways to do it, and that's what I'm trying to make happen.
I hear you. Right now it sounds to me, Senator, knowing you, that you're going to have to be a no unless you guys can change this because of the precedent that it sets. We'll wait and see how you vote when this comes before and what happens then. I do want to ask you, in the time I have left, limited time I have left, about North Korea. You were with Otto Warmbier's family when his plane finally landed back in the United States, when he was finally released from being held in North Korea. When the president says that he takes Kim Jong-un's word for it, that he didn't know about Otto's condition, do you believe him?
It's not plausible that he didn't know about it. Kim describes himself as the supreme leader. Otto Warmbier was the only American prisoner at the time that this horrible thing happened to him. I mean, he was terribly mistreated. He was sentenced to 15 years hard labor.
Hearing that? What does it do to you? What does it say to you hearing that from the president?
Yeah, I've expressed myself clearly about it, saying this guy can't be, Kim cannot be let off the hook, and he can't be trusted. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking to North Korea.
Right.
I have not said that, Kate. In fact, I said we should talk to them. One of the problems we had with trying to get Otto out, and I worked on this, as you know, for a year and a half. I'm very close to the family, and they're terrific, by the way, and incredibly resilient, taking their grief and using it, channeling it into very constructive ways to help hold up the kind of human rights abuses that are going on in North Korea every day. But it's just not plausible to think that Kim didn't know about it. And so we should be talking to them, of course, but we should do it knowing full well that this is a regime that has a history of human rights abuses and that has not been trustworthy, whether it's from the Clinton years, the Bush years, the Obama years, where they have made commitments and not kept them. So we got to go in with our eyes open.
Yeah. Senator Portman, thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Kate. Always good to talk to you.
Really appreciate it.